The second generation iPhone SE from early 2020 is the best value iPhone you can buy right now. It runs iOS 16 and can do nearly anything and everything the top of the line iPhone 14 Pro can do. Yes, the second generation iPhone SE, in stark contrast to the 2022 model, which is a terribly overpriced $430 on Apple's website, whereas the 2020 SE buying used or refurbished off eBay can be found for often under $150. iOS 16, fast, smooth speeds, 150 American dollars. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and going into 2023, I certainly didn't expect this iPhone to be the absolute best value of the entire lineup, still running the latest and greatest software, and yet here we are. While there's a lot to be desired in the experience, particularly with camera quality and battery life, not to mention the 2014 era home button design, the raw performance and power provided by the A13 Bionic chipset inside has ensured the phone is still lightning quick on iOS 16 and feels just about as good as any other newer iPhone. It's as if you put the internals of a PS4 into a PS2. Perhaps not a perfect comparison, but the A13 is still very much a strong CPU even over 3 years after its introduction when it came with the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro, shortly before the SE2 would launch early 2020. This was a weird iPhone in more ways than one, but it aimed to mimic the success of the 2016 iPhone SE, the phone that retained the old design of the iPhone 5 and 5S, but had the specs and rear camera of the iPhone 6S, which was a top-of-the-line smartphone for the time, all for a significantly cheaper price tag. This time around, the SE didn't get the same camera as the iPhone 11, but instead kept the same sensor that was in the iPhone 8, the phone this device so clearly replicates. And while that wasn't great, the just over 2-year-old camera wasn't that bad back in 2020, and while it lacked night mode, it still had the same amount of megapixels as newer phones and benefited from the faster chipset, allowing for higher quality shots than its 2017 counterpart. Both the iPhone 8 and SE2 are running iOS 16 today, and whilst they look identical, there's no denying that the SE2 is a significant step up. For perspective, the iPhone 8 is cheaper on eBay.com, but not by much of a margin, often still costing around $100, which, while still good value considering you can run iOS 16 and do basically anything, has Apple's A11 Bionic chipset, which is slower and older and won't be receiving iOS updates for as long as the SE2 will. iOS 17 may or may not come to the iPhone 8, 8 Plus, and iPhone 10, this remains to be seen, but it's most definitely going to come to the 2020 SE, and I'd expect iOS 18 as well at minimum before official support expires. And then there's the third gen iPhone SE, a phone that Apple charges way too much for, given that, frankly, it's barely better than the SE2. The iPhone SE2 from the iPhone 8 changed nothing but the chipset. Then the 2022 SE yet again changed nothing but the chipset, in spite of that original foundation with the iPhone 8 fast approaching 5 years old. So it has the A15 Bionic chipset, which was in the iPhone 13 and 13 Pro, but beyond that, the only addition of note was 5G networking, though not mmWave 5G notably, but I don't think it's a stretch to say 5G is a feature most of us can live without. And while the A15 certainly outperforms the A13, and it makes the camera slightly better, it doesn't change the fact that you still have to pay a lot more money to get it. Turning to the used market does help the SE3 look better, but it hasn't been around that long, and so there's not that many of them available. And generally speaking, if you're looking to buy an SE used, you might as well get the cheaper one. Even so, the SE3 is one of the few phones I would look to buy used before I buy new, just because Apple overcharges so much for it. The biggest thing for me that the SE3 has over the SE2 is slightly better battery life, about on par with the iPhone 12 mini. The SE line has been pretty bad battery-wise, and that was my biggest complaint regarding actually both of these phones. But even so, it's not the end of the world to keep a charger nearby, and if you're not a heavy user, which is very possible if you're looking for a budget iPhone, then the SE2 is still a really tempting option. Do watch out for the battery health of used phones, however, as at around 80% or so, it'll be negatively impacting your experience and will need replaced at some point. Apple does that for $50. Even if you do have to keep a charger nearby, the amount of cash saved in getting the phone in the first place might make it a worthwhile trade-off. But is this really the best value iPhone out there? It's a difficult question to answer because when you're buying used, not only do prices vary so much, but there's also phones on the other end of the spectrum that do give really good value, such as the iPhone 13 Pro. I've seen it for as low as $600 on eBay.com, which is an insane deal, especially considering it gives up barely anything from the iPhone 14 Pro. Now, it is used, but it's only a year old, and it just represents overall good value. I did a recent review if you want to take a look, but while that is a very good value phone, the SE2 is straight up better value. Why? Because the SE2 can do basically anything the 13 Pro can do. No, the camera's not as good, no, the battery life isn't as good, but when it comes to the core iOS experience, downloading and using apps, the SE2 does it all. It isn't slow, it supports practically everything, and those are really the two big things when it comes to actually actually using your iPhone. Now, the display is also not as good, that's obviously worth a mention, but again, core experience. And to be fair, if we only consider the experience, then perhaps the original iPhone SE is the best value iPhone, going for under $50 at times on eBay, and running iOS 15, which as of right now still does pretty much everything iOS 16 does, and for the next couple of years should run pretty much the newest version of every app and do practically everything. The battery life will be brutal, but it would work, and it's insanely cheap. So again, at some point you need to find a balance between price point and performance, and really it comes down to what your price range is. What is your budget for a phone? And if you're looking at under $200 and you want to pump the most performance you can out of your phone, I'd say the SE2 is definitely worth a look. So let's talk about the competition closer to that price point, starting with the iPhone XR. The XR tends to go for around $200, making it slightly more expensive for what I would consider to be a roughly equal or slightly better phone. You're giving up the size and extra battery life if you do get the SE2, but you get a better processor. It's a pretty fair trade-off that'll appeal to different users. However, one nice thing probably not oft considered regarding the SE2 is that since it came out in 2020, at maximum it's not even 3 years old yet as of making this video. The XR came out late 2018, making it potentially over 4 years old already. They were selling it up until late 2021, so some of them will be newer. But a lot can happen in those extra 2 years, especially with the battery health and just in general overall degradation of the hardware and durability as the phone may be dropped, scuffed, and just well used in general. While in theory, iPhones shouldn't get slower or worse over time as long as the battery is still healthy, in truth, the longer a phone is used, the more issues tend to pop up, just like with anything else. So with a newer phone, the chances of something going wrong is lower. Another phone you might want to look at over the iPhone SE2 would be the iPhone 11, which is the same phone as the iPhone XR, but with 2 camera lenses. It gets the ultra wide, and it's slightly faster, in fact having the exact same specs as the iPhone SE2 with the A13, although because it is so much bigger, the battery life is much better, and the camera sensors themselves are also significantly improved. The iPhone 11 can be found for like $250, and it goes up from there. I did see some lower, of course, prices vary so much, and it's tough, because while the iPhone 11 is definitely better than the SE2, is it $100 better? Honestly, maybe not. Yeah, the screen's bigger and the camera's better, but the core experience is going to be very similar, and they should last about as long as each other when it comes to software support over the years. So I definitely wouldn't be afraid to go higher to the iPhone 11, but I don't think it's a necessary extra $100 you have to spend. The SE2 for what it is at 150-ish is just such good value. It really is. The balance between performance and price, it's really difficult to beat. And is there even another iPhone around that price point? I suppose the iPhone 8, and I guess the 8 Plus. The 8 Plus is bigger, but if you're looking at an 8 Plus, I would just go for the iPhone XR or the 11. The iPhone 8 and the 8 Plus are the lowest tier iPhones being supported right now, along with the iPhone X, so they're the first on the chopping block when it comes to losing iOS support whenever that ends up happening. The iPhone 8 can be found for even under $100, but I would definitely buy the SE2 over it. Battery life should be marginally better, the camera's marginally better, but really to me it does come down to the faster speeds, extra RAM, for practically speaking not that much more money. It's also like 2.5 years more recent, thus less likely to have issues. I almost forgot about the iPhone X, but again it's the same thing as the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. It's the lowest tier iPhone being supported, and so it's hard for me to properly recommend it. The display is significantly better, but the SE2 wins out in most other categories. From its inception, the iPhone SE2 has always been one of the weirdest iPhones Apple's ever made, and the SE3 was frankly even weirder. The SE2 changed so little in the first place, and the SE3 basically took that and was like, hey, let's add 5G. Apple doesn't usually do such small upgrades like this. Even the original iPhone SE, while it was similar in that it had the latest chipset, it also had the best camera at the time, whereas that 2020 iPhone SE had a 2.5-year-old sensor. That makes a significant difference in the overall quality, and so while maybe it wasn't the best value when it originally came out, although I thought it was okay, the benefit of the phone being so weird and so similar to the iPhone 8 usually takes iPhones quite a while to drop in price, but that isn't really the case for the SE2 or 3. While the design is old and that comes with its limitations, everything else about the phone is pretty solid. It's an iPhone 11 in a smaller, more restrained body, and I like the iPhone 11. There's a lot to like here, and the overall performance and experience I think is going to be more than good enough for somebody who would be interested in this phone in the first place. I wouldn't go out of my way to buy the phone over, say, an iPhone 11, but I certainly wouldn't write it off just because it has a home button. And so, in conclusion here, the SE2 is the best value iPhone you can buy right now. Something I don't think any of us expected going into 2023, but here we are. And so, yeah, if you're thinking about it, buy the SE2, as weird as that feels to say. So with that, I think I'm right about done here. This is a bit of a different video for me, a little bit shorter, but I wanted to talk about this just because the phone is such a great device for so cheap, relatively speaking. So I thought maybe it would be useful. And hey, if it it was, or you found the video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content similar to this. If any of you out there have an SE2 or the SE3, let me know how it's going for you. Definitely want to hear your comments on this one. It was, it is, and always will be a very strange iPhone. But with that, thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.